Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today, we are doing a live conversation. We're calling this our Olympics pre-show. The Olympics are less than 24 hours away, keeping in mind that Tokyo is, I think, about 12 or 13 hours ahead of the East Coast of the U.S. So they are, actually, it must be right after midnight there. So it's the day of the Olympics in Tokyo. And I am Benjamin Cohen. I'm the news director at The Forward. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by the co-creators of the very popular Follow Team Israel social media account. They're on Facebook and Instagram at Follow Team Israel. We have Shari Wright-Pilo and David Wiseman. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So just to set the stage, you guys are both in Israel right now.
That's correct.
We are.
Okay. And where are you, Dave? Are you guys in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
So I'm in Jerusalem.
And I'm in Modi'in.
Where's Modi'in for our listeners who are not?
Modi'in is exactly in the middle between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's about 15 minutes from the airport.
Okay. That's pretty good.
It's the brand new city. 25 years old, but a brand new city.
Yeah, my parents live in Beit Shemesh, which is also, I think, around there somewhere. So, tell me a little bit about Follow Team Israel for people who are not familiar with the page. David, do you want to tell us how did you guys get started with it, and what kind of content do you post on there?
Sure. So Shari was asking around before the time of the London Olympics, 9 years ago, 2012, if anyone had heard news about the Israeli team in English.
On Twitter.
I replied that I had not. We got talking, and then we saw that there was really no news about the team. And so basically we took it upon ourselves to sort of share the stories of the athletes so that, the fans out there would know about who Team Israel was. Because often with the Olympics, it comes around every 4 years, and they compete in a lot of sports that don't get a lot of airtime in the intervening years. So these athletes suddenly appear on our radar, and we don't really know who they are, what their story is. And so, our mission at Follow Team Israel is to share the stories of the athletes all the time, regardless of what sport they play, so that people all over the world really get in touch with their stories, that become familiar with them, and sort of that, the Olympics in terms of a 4-year cycle, this is the pinnacle. This isn't like the first time they're going to hear about it and then the last time. This is just part of another chapter in their story.
Yeah. And how many? Sorry, Sherry,
go ahead.
No,
we really like the combination of, not necessarily all of our fans are sports fans, but they connect with the Israel story. Oh, wow, Israel has amazing athletes also, but they can also connect with the stories, like David said, of the individual athletes. Because it's not only the Olympics that we post about and talk about, it's during the 4 years leading up to it, from any sport, from rugby, lacrosse, synchronized swimming, baseball, hockey, football, American football in Israel. I mean, every sport that there is that Israeli athletes participate in or compete around the world, we want to tell their stories, and not only being on the podium.
Right. Do you find that there is more? Maybe it's just a function of the fact that we live in an age of social media. But do you feel that there are more Israeli athletes to talk about today than there was 20 years ago?
Yes, there are more athletes. The culture of sport in Israel is very different than the culture that I grew up in Canada, where, sports was a big part of our lives. But it's definitely changing in Israel more and more, and the culture of sport is growing. So there are more athletes. And then once again, as soon as you have in Israel medalists, whether it's in world championships, European championships, and of course the Olympics, that brings, those sports onto the stage, and you see the growth of children in Israel participating in those particular sports, like gymnastics, like judo, like baseball.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. The reality is that there's more sports. Skateboarding is now at the Olympics for
Right.
the first time. Surfing, sports
Surfing, yeah.
climbing. So all these, they're giving more opportunities to more athletes to compete. Triathlon is a relatively new sport, was introduced at Sydney in 2000. So it's now been around for 20 something years, but now triathletes are getting a chance to compete on this stage. And so um, if you look at the Olympics at the 80s, there wasn't really a lot of growth or, expansion of the program. And so the Olympics of today is open to far more many athletes in far more many sports than was before. So that's also a factor.
In the last Olympics, I think Israel won 2 judo medals in Rio. Did that help? I have 2 questions. David, judo has always been a very popular sport in Israel, and I'm curious as to why that is. And then the second part of my question is, has there been an increase in interest in judo since those 2 medals were won?
Yeah, well, I mean, judo is a sport that's accessible equally to both boys and girls, which is great. It's not sort of gender specific in that regard, so everyone can compete it. And Israel's had an incredibly special relationship with the sport. 5 of its 9 Olympic medals in total have been won in the sport, including the very first 2. Yael Arad won silver in Barcelona in 1992, and Oren Smadja won bronze the very next day. And so because of that, that we've had, most of our Olympic success has come in that sport. And plus now the athletes are quite good at it on the international stage. Those factors combined have really put judo in the forefront of people's attention. And because of that, it's really increased participation and interest. And it's great for young kids becoming teenagers who want to develop confidence and things like that, for a sport such as judo, where it's not necessarily about sort of winning and losing, but respecting your opponent, respecting the sport and the moves. It's really great for their development as a young adult. And it can give them far more in terms of like lessons for life than like a sport just like sort of soccer or basketball.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I want to know. I want to know which storylines you're going to be following that you're most interested in this Olympics. I know how many Israeli athletes are competing this year?
There are 90 Olympians. The last one was just added on a couple of just less than a week ago. The weightlifter David.
Okay.
There are 90, including the baseball team. It's the biggest team that's
almost
ever
double.
been. It's almost double what it was, 4 or 5 years ago. And there are amazing athletes, world-class athletes that are going. David and I have come to when everybody asks us who's our favorites, we see so many that are possible podiums. But when somebody asked us last week, who's your favorite? It's like, how do you choose one of your children to be a favorite? So we're trying, but we can say that there is potential. Today, there was a press conference from the Israeli Olympic Committee that we participated in. And the expectations from the Israeli Olympic Committee are 2 to 3 medals and 10 finals. Now, the AP came out with a report saying 7 to 9 medals. Yeah. So let's say we'll be happy either way.
I'd just like to stress, independent of that, how difficult it is for each of our athletes to even qualify for the Olympics. And in many regards, for them to do so is way beyond their wildest dreams and expectations, because Israel now is part of Europe. And, each continent is allocated a certain amount of spots, and you have to sort of hit very high standards. And so when it comes to that, it's really difficult for qualifying from Israel than it might be from places in other parts of the world where the competition isn't as stiff. So for them to send a team of 90 is just incredible. Now, obviously that's been really inflated because of baseball, 20-something athletes. But even without baseball, it would be in the mid-60s, which is almost 20 more than what we had 4 years ago, which had been our biggest team up until that point. And so in many regards, just to have a team of this size is really incredible, because the thing is, 90 athletes puts Israel basically in the top 30
of all of the teams
of those, all the nations, 200 nations, whatever it is, sending athletes. And to give you an idea how many of like who sent around 90 athletes last time, countries like Portugal, like a pretty serious sports nation, countries like that, that's like Israel's really graduated. And so, yeah, it's a bigger team, but that also now comes with expectations. And, that's something hopefully now that the athletes are more experienced in dealing with.
Yeah.
We also have, from those 90 Olympians, not including the baseball team, we have quite a few athletes that this is their second, third, and fourth Olympic Games.
Right.
So it's a mature, there's also very young Olympian athletes representing us, but they're also very seasoned athletes representing us.
Yeah. And just last point with regard to that, we're leaving some amazing athletes at home. In a sport like judo, where you can only send one athlete per country per weight class. So if we had like 3 women who were really great in the 49 kilo, only one of them can go. Mm-hmm. So, and same with all the other weight classes. And this is part of the reason why in sort of modern sports, athletes move countries, because they're like, well, if I go to, I don't know, Denmark, and they're not so strong in this sport, I can basically become part of their team. But, it works both ways. The Israeli team has now benefited from expats from Russia, expats from Ethiopia, expats from America. So in that way, sort of, it cuts both ways.
It was interesting. I'm just going to add, when you said expats, we do have quite a few on the team, but also today at the press conference, they asked Yaakov Tamarkin and Chana Maminko, the swimmer and the high jumper. They both were not born in Israel. Yaakov arrived to Israel when he was 2 years old. So they asked him as an Ole Chadash. So he said, I'm really not an Ole Chadash, I'm an Ole Vatik. But Chana has been here for 8 years in Israel. She did compete in one Olympic Games for the Ukraine, but she said she loves the country. She loves the warmth of the Israelis. She was accepted right away as an Israeli athlete. And she said she's very proud to, carry the flag in opening ceremonies. And Yaakov, he said he came here when he was 2, so he's completely integrated as an Israeli. Right. But for his parents, they're so proud of him because he still has family living in Russia. And for his family, just the point of making Aliyah and then having your son carry the flag at the opening ceremonies, I mean, to me, that gives me the shivers.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned all these expats, and we've been reading a lot about Jews, American Jews, Jewish athletes in general from all over the world who can get instant citizenship in Israel, and so they end up playing for the Israeli squad. What are your thoughts about that,
David?
Like I said, it sort of works both ways. I mean, since the baseball team has burst onto the scene with the World Baseball Classic, and they got all the athletes from the States, and people had a problem with that. Well, I actually said, listen, if you found a Jewish first baseman from Panama, a Jewish second baseman from the Dominican Republic, sort of a Jewish third baseman from Italy, so on and so forth, that actually perfectly encapsulates Israel, the melting pot of cultures. And so not only do we not have an issue with it, this is just who Israel is. People who come here, love Israel, love their sport, and are now playing it here. And, people sort of in the beginning, they thought it was a joke, thought it was a gimmick. And then as sort of the team had more success, then they had to change their tune and what sort of their issue was. We just embraced it. These guys are such incredible ambassadors, and it's been the most unbelievable journey they've been on since the World Baseball Classic, which was 2017. You thought, how could they top this? They topped it in the most amazing way. One of only 6 teams in the baseball competition. So think about that. Even if they come last, that's the 6th in the world, which is just...
It also means crazy. They're going to have a 50% chance of winning a medal.
Yeah,
which
well,
is pretty high.
yeah. I mean, the baseball, it's a very sort of complex format they're
The round
using.
robin.
Would you like me to try and explain it?
Sure.
So
I think the baseball team is really going to be of interest to so many people
Yeah.
because it's been making so much headlines recently. Yeah.
So 6 teams. There's 2 groups of 3. In one group, you have Japan, Mexico, the Dominican Republic. In the other group, you have Korea, USA, Israel. So you start off by playing both of the teams in your group. So Israel will play Korea, and then they'll play the USA, and that will actually be the USA's first game when it's Israel's second game. So
what's the date of Israel's first game?
So Israel's first game, I'll just bring it up here, is going to be July 29th.
29th.
So a week from today. They'll be playing South Korea on the Thursday, and then they'll be playing the United States on the 30th, the next day on the Friday.
Okay.
So they'll either finish first, second, or third in the group. So the next stage is they play first, second, whichever they are, they'll play the corresponding team from the other group. And based on like whether they're third, second, or first, and if they win that game against the team from the other group, will determine where they are in this whole bracket. And so obviously the higher they are, and if they win that matchup game, the better they are. And then it's sort of one by one, teams get picked off and eliminated. So I think the soonest they can get eliminated is if they finish third and they play the third in the other group and then lose to that third team, they're out. They finish 6th. And I think if they win that, and then they would keep going up a spot. But from that point, they would have to basically keep winning to advance. That's how it works.
Does it it's okay.
Sorry.
Live, that's what happens on live streams. Does it make a difference that we're in the group with South Korea and the US, which I think are very highly ranked teams?
So it's interesting in that Japan has closed down its season for the Olympics. So all the top Japanese players, except those that are in the MLB, will be in the Olympics. But for USA, then none of the major leaguers are there. So it's either college players or sort of former MLB guys. Same with the Dominican Republic, Mexico. I'm not sure about Korea. So basically the fact that we've avoided Japan is really good because Japan is by far the strongest side. And so, we have to see. Like USA, they've got a mixture. And really it's going to depend to sort of nerves on the day, how you do,
The temperature.
Yeah, with baseball, it's about, leaving guys on base and making the most of your opportunities when they come up. But what's very interesting is that Jerry Weinstein, who was the manager of Israel when they had their World Baseball Classic, is now going to be in the US dugout.
Oh,
so wow. That's an interesting wrinkle.
So he knows all of our calls.
Basically.
That the thing with the baseball again is when we started the discussion about baseball, we also started before that about culture and sports culture in Israel. Since 2017, you've seen the local baseball and softball, leagues, little leagues just expand completely. I would probably say in the last 5 years, it's doubled, if not more. So it's a great thing for Israel also. We know that on Follow Team Israel, half of our followers are coming from the United States. I'm sure they are going to be going Team America. They'll have 2 flags in their hands. Hopefully they'll be waving the blue and white flag a little bit higher. But it's definitely going to be very exciting to watch.
Another person I'm hearing a lot about is Linoy Ashram. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. But she seems to be pre-Olympics. She seems to be winning a lot of the qualifying events, like gold medaling in a lot of the qualifying.
She has done amazing in all of the different competitions, in the Europeans, in the Grand Slams, in the Grand Prix, and the European Cups. She's won gold and silvers last week in Israel. In the Grand Prix, there were international Grand Prix. She won 5 gold medals, every gold medal that she could win, the all-arounds in each apparatus. She has worked hard. She's had that extra year for the campaign, for the Olympic campaign, to prepare herself. I think that she has a really good chance. She's ready. She's an amazing athlete. But we also have to remember there's the Russian twins, and I think that the three of them are the top three in the competition in the rhythmic gymnastics. The two sisters, the twins in Russia, because also during the last year of Corona, they had less competitions, and when they did have competitions, some of them, the Russians didn't compete a few times, but Linoy is really on her game. She's ready to show the world and Israel, and we're so proud of her. She's just like a wonderful human being. David has spoken to her quite a few times. Yeah. She's just great. She's just great.
When is the earliest that someone in Israeli could medal in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I mean, theoretically on the first day. You know, we've got Taekwondo up on the first day.
On Saturday.
Yeah, it's sudden death.
Judo.
And I think we have judo starting on the Sunday. I don't think we have any judo. Do we have judo the first day?
I think we do. Let me just pull it up.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We have judo on the 23rd. We have Shira Rishoni, the 48 kilo.
So what is your plan? The two of you I'm 12 hours behind Tokyo. I think you're 6 hours behind Tokyo. What's the plan? What's the game plan for keeping up and posting everything on a timely basis of all the Israeli athletes?
So at the night before, probably around 8 o'clock Israel time, we will be sending out a preview for tomorrow post, including which athletes, what time they'll be competing. And then during the day, we will be covering if there's, they've gone up to the semifinals, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, whatever is going up, updating it. Then we'll have at the end of the day, which sometimes, most of the days it will end around 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. Sometimes I don't think it's that much later. They start at 3 and 4 in the morning. So David and I will definitely be waking up very early for the next 2.5 weeks. But we'll have one major post in the evening, the night before, in the morning, during the morning, and then a roundup, and then again the preview for the next day. So we've been very busy, trying to organize how we're going to do that. But again, I have a partner who is a sports genius. It's wonderful. It's great. I do the graphics and some of that stuff, and David does the statistics. So it's an amazing partnership.
Are you you worried about any hiccups, any potential hiccups? What if your internet goes out in Modi'in?
I had my technicians here today.
Okay.
Seriously. So I'm hooked up. I'll go to my neighbors at 3 in the morning. That's all.
It's not like if a worldwide pandemic isn't going to shut down the games, then, the show will go on.
We still have unlimited data.
That's good. I want to, while we're still just talking about some of the athletes, another athlete that I'm interested in is Anat Lilior. Who is she? Is she the youngest on the Israeli delegation?
The swimmer, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the swimmers or the
you're saying
okay. Or one of the gymnasts even. Anat Lilior is now 21. I think there's younger.
Yeah.
So. But she's going to be surfing, and you're saying this is the first time surfing is in the Olympics?
That is correct.
And how does Israel rank in the big scheme of things?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, she's not really been up there on the top of the world tour, but she's made her way via the European qualifiers. She actually qualified very early in the piece. In way back in the sort of September 2019. And sort of we shared her story from then, and this is sort of one of sort of the things about the page that we're really proud about, that sort of without that, people might not even know, oh, wow, there's surfing at the Olympics. Do we have a surfer? And so, because of us speaking to her, we've become, the fans of the page have become very familiar with Anat's story. Only 20 surfers, 20 male surfers, 20 female surfers will be competing in Tokyo, 40 in total.
Wow.
And it's incredible that we've sort of got one of those spots.
Yeah.
And it's great for her sort of profile, for the sports profile here, that we have a surfer up. Because the thing is, it's sort of, you automatically become more sort of interested and focused in the sports that you have an athlete there. Sort of, we're not
Right.
so sort of invested in wrestling, or we're not sort of as invested in diving or et cetera, water polo, because there isn't that interest. So if your nationalistic and partisan tendencies really come to the fore when the Olympics are on. And, you know, the other side of the coin is like with USA, who I think sending a team of, I don't know, like 600, 500, then it's too much. It's just impossible
Right.
and completely overwhelming to be on top of it all, because they're in everything all the time. And, you know, they win 60 gold medals. So, okay, like it loses its impact. But this team is sort of small enough that you can follow every athlete, see how they're doing, and big enough that there's enough there that it's not just like 8 athletes. So it's sort of like, oh, there's like our next athlete is only up in 4 days. So sort of we can switch off. We don't have that, which is really terrific.
I think almost every day this year, these games, we have some competition.
Yeah, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
Will you have any like interviews with the athletes or anything like that?
There are, if we were in Tokyo, it would be a little bit easier, but there are conditions set up by the Israeli Olympic Committee. There will be specific Zoom events that we are invited to, that there'll be questions and answers, which is really nice that the Olympic Committee has brought us in and has accepted us as, you know, part of the media group, that they, you know, the close circle. But we will definitely try our best. A lot of the athletes love sharing their content with us, and we share it. Just the other day, Yoav Cohen, the windsurfer, we saw a glimpse that there was something blue in his hair. So I quickly wrote him on Instagram. I said, Yoav, come on, you got to show me that game cut, you know, the race cut. Because it started in 2012 with Shachar Tsubali. He had the Israeli flag, and we like caught it right away and posted it, and it went wild. So I said, okay, Yoav is doing something like that too. Let's grab him. And he sent us some exclusive images from the Olympic Village, and said, go ahead. Here's my quote.
Yeah. And
they also know that we have a reach outside of Israel. And I think that the athletes really appreciate it, that when, you know, all of a sudden they're getting followers also from all over the world that are not fellow athletes. Because Peter Palchik and Sagimuki from the judo and Ori, they have friends all over the world, but they're in the sport. All of a sudden, we're introducing them to Jewish communities all over the world, to lovers of Israel all over the world. And we've had conversations with the athletes at get-togethers and events with the athletes, and they really do appreciate the exposure that we're giving them. One, because we're giving them exposure internationally in English, and second, because we're not only talking about the medals that they win, we're talking about their journey.
And if I could just add a couple of points there. So Yoav Cohen is in RSX, which is sort of the successor to Mistral wind sailing, and that's basically the most famous event in Israeli sporting history. We've won 3 medals in that event, and our only gold medal, Gal Friedman 2004, came in that event. So that event has a very special sort of place in Israeli sporting history. And the second point about the interviews is that at these interviews, you don't actually ever get that much, you know, like sort of after they win, you know, how does it feel? Feels great. You know, it feels wonderful. When they lose, how does it feel? Feels disappointing. And that's not really what the page is about. We're sort of, we're not into that. It's very one-dimensional, and you don't really get that much. And sort of, it's more about their story and their journey. Now, obviously, it's different. Like, you know, if they were competing in a world championship in sort of windsurfing, and it was in Mexico. The reality is it doesn't get the same sort of exposure. People don't care. They're doing the same thing they normally do. It's just the whole world is watching.
Right.
And so in that regard, nothing's sort of different, but everything's different. But the sport, at the purity, like the sport's exactly the same. They just have to get up there and compete. So in terms of that, they just have to sort of get onto basics, and they know what they have to do. And then suddenly having microphones in their face and all this, it's sort of like, in a way, it's disconcerting to them, because, now there's a sudden interest, but also it's very fleeting, it's all very in the moment. And also that's what you find, like in the Olympics, like the news cycle is so insane that, the story that everyone's focused on at like noon, like no one forgets about 6 hours later, no one forgets about 3 weeks, like 3 days later. By the end of week 2, no one can even remember what happened in week 1. So that's something to keep in mind.
Also, after 2012 and 2016, we did get a chance to meet with the athletes after the Olympics, after they had been home for a few weeks, and there was a get-together. And then it was more interesting to hear their personal stories, their experiences in the village, the experiences, if it was, on the mat, or we spoke to Alex Shatilov, we spoke to Ori Sasson, of course, but to also, the experiences that they felt, not only the podium and not getting to the podium, but with other athletes and interesting stories. So I'm sure that we'll have the opportunity when they come back and they've settled down, then we'll have the opportunity to learn more about their time in Tokyo.
Yeah. One of the ironies of the Olympics is that it's suddenly got this sudden interest, and 60% of the people, however many percent, don't know anything about the sport, don't know anything about the athletes. It's like, but yeah, USA is competing against Senegal. Like, go Senegal, go USA. Like, they don't know the athletes. It's just very much like that. And also, it's a bit like the page. They're not so invested in sort of the athlete. It's more about, it's someone representing Israel. That's what they connect to.
Right.
And the fact that that person is pursuing their dreams, they love that. And they're happier for them if they succeed. Now, the difference between us and traditional media is they don't love them any less if they don't. It's not sort of, you have to, if you don't win, you're a bad person.
Right.
We're going to move on from you and sort of ignore you and all that. So that's another big difference. Is like I said at the start, it's sort of about their journey. So this is just another chapter. And it shouldn't sort of be like, okay, you're going to be defined by this for the rest of your life. And the same thing, like if they do well and win a medal, which is obviously wonderful, it's important for them not to sort of say, well, this is the end of my journey, and just sort of, now what? Because I think a lot of athletes come unstuck mentally when they climb the mountain, they win a medal, win a gold medal, and so they feel lost in a way because they don't have anything to sort of motivate them. Not next, they think their life is going to change. I mean, it does in some ways, but ultimately they have to use that as a springboard to sort of generate the next part of their journey. They just can't think it's finished now, and it's sort of the equivalent of a lump.
You could use the comparison also with Yarden Jerby and Ori Sasson, that they won at the same time. Yarden decided to leave judo and go forward. She's lecturing, she's doing different businesses, and she's going forward. And Ori said, no, I still have it in me. I want another chance to stand on that podium. And it's interesting because he might go against Reiner from France, who he lost to in the semifinals in 2016 and won the bronze instead of the silver or gold. So we'll see how that match goes. It will be very interesting. With the judo, the draw was this morning.
Yeah.
This morning. So it was a very interesting draw for quite a few of them. With Sagi Muki, he might have a chance to go up against Saeed Moulai, the Iranian who's now in Mongolia, who represents Mongolia. And then I think who was going after David? Fill it in. It was Tohar or Peter?
I'm not sure, but it's interesting that Raz Hershko in the 78 plus kilos for the female. She's up against someone from Saudi
Japan.
Arabia.
Oh, from
first
Saudi
time.
Arabia, right.
So we have to see what happens there, if the fight will happen and all that. I mean, that's a sort of another aspect of being part of representing Israel. So there's a lot of unwanted distractions that sort of have to come the athlete's way, when they just want to, the fact that she's from Saudi Arabia, where there's an issue sort of competing against someone from Israel. And if they go deeper into the tournament and have to fight someone against, there was the Egyptian last time who wouldn't shake hands, and the Iranians who won't fight at all. And then, like I said, all they want to do is compete. They don't want all these sort of distractions and white noise to bother them.
From both sides.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The athletes sometimes I think are just caught in the middle of a bigger political conversation.
Yeah, from people who don't know anything, from people who are just like I said, this is sort of the issue of the minute, and then they don't know about it. Like, they're not going to care about the athlete 2 minutes from now. It's just sort of something to sort of, stop them talking about Ben and Jerry's, for a couple of minutes.
Hopefully Ben and Jerry's won't still be in the news when the Olympics starts. I know we're coming up on our time here. Are there any final thoughts or predictions that either of you have for the games?
Yeah, I mean,
okay, you go ahead, David, first.
Yeah, we're just very excited to see how this team does. Like I said, it's a great team, almost double what we've had before in so many different sports. Like I said, we just want them to have fun and enjoy the moment. The worst thing an athlete can do is sort of basically disqualify themselves because they let the moment get to them. But if they just do what they did to help them get there and enjoy and have fun and remember why they're there, and then go out and do well, that's all that we could hope for. And
I think that I was just gonna say, in addition, the athletes now, those who are competing in the next 2 or 3 days, they're closing down. They're not posting on their social media. They're really in their zone, and we appreciate that and we respect that. And I think that this is we did 2012, we did the Winter Olympics, we did 2016, then we did the Winter Olympics, we've done the Paralympics, we've done Special Olympics, World Cups, and it's so exciting when we do get to the Olympics. But we'll also come down after the Olympics and we'll continue on with the next World Cup or World Championship, and we'll continue going, and hopefully we'll continue growing, and hopefully people will still appreciate it. But I think for me and David to be doing this for over 9.5 years now, it's amazing. It's so much fun. It's exciting. We both love sports. We both love Israel, and we hope that we're sharing our love with the rest of the world.
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
yeah.
I was going to say, something that's been sort of forgotten all this is that because of the delay of COVID, the next Winter Olympics are only 6.5 months away, the beginning of 2022. And so after the games finish, we've got that. I mean, of course,
we have got the Paralympics first.
But the Winter Olympics are scheduled to be in Beijing, of all places. And so who knows whether that can even take place. There hasn't been a lot of talk about the Winter Olympics, but we'll see. So, and also
we will be following them, and Israel has Olympic athletes who will be, joining the Winter Olympics.
They have ice skaters,
ice skaters, skeletons,
skiers, and all that.
Isn't there
bobsled? Yes, the bobsled and skeleton. They have a new team. David Greaves, who is the president of the federation, he's a great guy, and he's pushing it forward and finding new athletes. And we have Georgie Cohen, a female skeleton runner.
Wow.
She's been training the last 18 months in London and outside of London, but getting ready.
Not just with this team of 90, which is sort of shows great growth, but also what we see now with away from the Olympics is that Israel hosted the Giro d'Italia, is hosting international judo tournaments, is also sort of stepping up in that regard. So we see far more world-class sport happening in Israel than we did previously, which is another sign of sort of the maturity and the evolution that's happening here.
There's nothing like being in Tel Aviv during a Grand Prix, a judo Grand Prix, competing and having 5,000, 6,000 Israelis cheering for you when you're on the tatami. It's an unbelievable experience. And when you win a medal in that same match, it's the athletes were, it was just a high. Everybody was on a high. It was unbelievable feeling. The hall was, the stadium was just rumbling. It was an amazing experience.
It's more than just a home crowd. There's something extra. There's like an intangible aspect to it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Japanese athletes are going to miss out on their home support, and all of the athletes are going to miss out on any type of support sort of in the stands. And in that regard, it's very sad that their family and friends, can't be there with them, on their journey, sort of this part of the journey. And so it's going to be interesting. I mean, we have to sort of be glad that they're happening at all, but, there's going to be some caveats that it's not like it normally is.
A lot of families usually travel with the athletes to go see them wherever they're traveling. We always have a reporter on the location. Our first reporter was someone at the 2012 games, our friend Ruth Wyman, who held up a huge poster and map and flag wherever we went, follow Team Israel. It was amazing. We've had at the Tour de France, we've had people all over the world representing us as the reporter on the spot. And this year, we're on Zoom.
Yeah. Well, it makes your page probably even more important. I know personally, I find out a lot of Israeli sports news from following your page because you guys are always the first to report it. Like seconds after, it happens, you guys have something up on your page. So I'm always very impressed with that. So listen, David, Shari, I really appreciate you taking the time out of what's about to be a very busy 2.5 weeks. So I appreciate you taking the time. And I want our viewers to know they can follow Team Israel on Facebook and on Instagram, right? And you guys will be, and Twitter, and you'll be posting updates throughout the next 2.5 weeks.
Constantly.
Well, good luck. Maybe we'll talk at the end of the games if you're still awake.
Yeah.
And be in touch with us when we are, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, and good luck.
Our
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thanks, Binyamin.
Right, take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.